Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Sylvia Overly. I'm part of the planning team for Faith in the City here at Knollwood Baptist Church. And we're so glad that you're here with us today. And just love to hear this energy and see this energy in the room. And again, we are in our 7th year of Faith in the City, focusing on educational equity. We were telling some of our guests earlier that when we started out back in, I think, 2018, we were going to focus maybe a year on education and then move into another topic. Guess what? There's plenty to unpack. And so we're still here, and really largely because of your interest and continued support. We are looking forward to hearing from our guest speakers today about the exciting work happening locally with My Brother's Keeper, Winston-Salem. This is an organization that you know is dedicated to improving the lives and empowering young men of color, and we're so glad to learn more about it today, the recent developments that have really re-energized that program. And we're particularly pleased that today's program coincided with a site visit from the National MBK Alliance, started by the Obama Foundation, so we'll hear about that in a minute. So we're going to talk a lot today. So without further delay, I will turn it over to someone that we know very well, Reverend Paul Robeson Ford, who is acting as our presenter and moderator, will introduce our other guests later in the program. And I'm not sure that you need an introduction to most of these folks here, but we're so glad to have you today. So, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to see you all today on what's turned into a gorgeous day, gorgeous spring day. Amen. And so before I get started, I want you to acknowledge Mayor Pro Tem Dee Dee Adams, who is here today. Institutional leaders with my systems champions with my Brother's Keeper steering committee, okay? And you all know why she is, just because of the fierce passion that she has for the mission and the work that moves things forward. So I want to give her a minute to greet you all, and then we'll get into things.
Thank you, Pastor Ford. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Glad to be here, glad to be associated and part of the collaboration with my Brother's Keeper. I think when Kelly and them asked me, and Kenneth and Reverend Ford, they didn't have to ask me twice. Again, as I tell people, my passion is about the future, and the future are our young people in our community and our citizens. I just want to tell you all something. A couple of weeks ago, I was in DC and at the Congressional Congress to see our elected officials, the senators and the representatives. And I've been doing this for 15 years as your councilman. And I can tell you this, whatever it is that we're doing to try to collaborate in our community, we have to keep doing it. As I told them earlier at another meeting, we're gonna have to make lemonade with just lemons and lime. You might not have no lemons, you might just have some salt or something, I don't know. But all the good work that this organization has done with others, we have to keep doing it. We have to persist to resist. We have to keep moving forward. Again, the present national landscape, as Pastor Ford likes to call it, I like how you word that. The present national landscape lends itself to people like me to continue to be who I am, which I'm a soldier. We're at war. In my head, we're at war. So you all can think whatever you like. My job is to ensure that my Brother's Keeper and Action for Equity and Habitat and Imprints and Crosby Scholars and the students, the school system, the educators, that they continue to get the support that they get from elected officials like me. And again, I look forward. I'm riding or dying with them all day. I'm going, but like I told them, for someone like me, this is an opportunity again for me to learn. You cannot be a leader intentionally and not want to learn. Superintendent, leaders have to be educated. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. She's Maxine Waters, Winston-Salem. And I want to thank the team who helped to make this look real pretty in terms of this presentation that we've got. They can say that's not my strength. I do other things. However, we've got some good content here. What we're gonna do today, we've got kind of two parts. I'm gonna share a presentation with you all just to provide background for those of you who may not have it, because it's really important to understand what My Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem is and what it's not. And what we have been able to accomplish in just a short couple of years since the relaunch of My Brother's Keeper, what we are looking towards next. And then we're going to have an opportunity to have some conversation with some special guests today. Superintendent Tricia McManus, who has been here before, of course, Dr. Mona Lovett, head of Crosby Scholars, and our special guest, MacArthur Antigua. I call him Sidecar Mac, and that's an inside joke that I'll explain later, who is here from MBK Alliance National, which is housed in the Obama Foundation as part of this site visit, as we are considered for possible inclusion in the accelerator communities. So we're really excited about that. I also want to take a moment and ask Amari, if you would stand up real quick. Amari Faison is our MBK ambassador. So he is part of an initial cohort of young men from networks all over the country, certified communities all over the country, representing Winston-Salem to the National MBK Alliance. He's already been promised to get some virtual FaceTime with President Obama and all that sort of thing. So they're excited, right? They're excited about this, part of the first cohort in the Vanguard, one of our rising young leaders. So glad to have him with us today as well. All right, so let's go on to the next slide here. So I want to talk about this. Matt had a great line in one of our sessions earlier today about the sediments of history, the sediments of history. And so it's important to understand that My Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem, as we know it now, is a relaunch that came together in April 2023 with the first meeting of the steering committee, a coalition of institutional stakeholders, elected officials, and organization and community leaders who gathered because of a shared commitment to improve outcome for boys and young men of color. MBK Winston-Salem was originally launched around 2016, and the mayor was one of the initial signatories. Mayor Allen joined, Mayor Pro Tem Adams and others who got behind it, Brother Alvin Atkinson and others who answered the call that was issued by then President Obama. And the history, of course, of My Brother's Keeper as a concept goes back to the killing of Trayvon Martin back in 2013. And many of you all remember that very dramatic press conference when then President Obama stood there in the White House briefing room and said, look, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon. And President Obama was deeply convicted that we needed to look at doing some things differently than we had done for our boys and young men of color, and Matt can speak more to this, but he gathered some of his closest advisors, Valerie, Jared, and others, and said, look, you've got, I think, 60 days or 90 days to kind of come back to me with a set of plans and idea for what to do going forward. And hence comes My Brother's Keeper and the 6 milestones that were kind of refined and developed over time. So those are the important segments of history that bring us to this moment where we are. Want to talk about milestone 6. So there are 6 milestones. If you were to go and just Google MBK Alliance and then follow kind of those links, you would be able to look at the 6 milestones that guide the work of My Brother's Keeper. And they cover things like being ready to enter school, and grade level reading by the 3rd grade, graduation from high school, involvement in the workforce or in college when you're out of school, and then milestone 6, which is that all youth, children should be safe from violent crime. So we have really hit the ground running, leveraging that shared sense of enthusiasm for collective impact, which I'll talk a lot more about in just a minute, and the determination to follow best practices for fostering that impact. And we have centered on milestone number 6. But even just in the time since we relaunched, because of the strength of our partnerships around that table of MBK, we have taken on work on additional milestones as well. One of the things that I want to point to, and this particular chart, you can get this information every year from the North Carolina Department of Instruction that publishes reports that look at everything from academic achievement to disciplinary rates and all of that sort of thing. And what you see here is what you will see consistently, not just in the state of North Carolina, but around the country, that those who are most impacted by exclusionary discipline are Black boys, okay, Black males. And what you will also notice, of course, is American Indian males, just as percentages. And of course, those are the two groups, demographics, that have this shared history of being on the other side of the American story and what they have in mind with Make America Great Again. And so MBK Winston-Salem has focused on exclusionary discipline in the public schools and how it disproportionately impacts boys and young men of color. And this is especially true. So here in Winston-Salem Forsyth County schools, Black boys account for about 15% of the school district students, but typically are representing around 30% of those students who are impacted by exclusionary discipline, and some 37% of juvenile justice involved youth. So of course that disproportion is palpable, and it is something that should concern us all. So the question is asked, and Mac and I were just talking about this in the car on the way over here, why does MBK Winston-Salem focus on the school to prison pipeline? The milestone, of course, is all children safe from violent crime. And so we're constantly talking about how these dots connect for us. There is research that makes three things very clear, okay? And one of them is that so young people involved in the juvenile justice system are more likely to die of gun violence. Research has shown that out. Furthermore, that fewer suspensions are associated with less risk for future criminal justice involvement, including the juvenile justice system. And third of all, that schools with lower suspension rates lead to positive outcomes for all students, but especially for Black males, right? So that is points of connection that we see here. And I often share the anecdote from Brother Rob Lang, who has been around this community in his role for well over a quarter century, working as the Middle District Assistant U.S. Attorney General. Okay, so you're talking about the federal government there in terms of the Department of Justice. And of course, he has been focused for years on tracking the high flyers, as we call them, those who are showing up with the highest rates of involvement of community disruption and violence. And what he was saying just in the last year or two is that according to the metrics that are used for that, the highest flyer in this area between Winston-Salem and Greensboro was at that time a 16-year-old Winston-Salem Forsyth County student, okay? So that's the direct overlap there in terms of cutting this off at the path, which is really what our work around the school to prison pipeline is. You need to collapse that entry point there when you are looking at sustainable long-term change that is going to address root causes and keep all of our children safe from violent crime. So who we are, this is important, and you are going to hear a bit more from some of these folks later on. You heard from Mayor Pro Tem Manners. This is just an exemplary list. There are many more folks who are either peripherally involved or even right around the table with us on a day-to-day basis. We have institutional leaders that include Tricia McManus, our superintendent of schools, Mayor Pro Tem D.D. Adams, community leaders such as Dr. Mona Lovett, Brother Adam Hill, Misha James is here in the audience today with We Heal Together, Valerie Glass, who heads Tribe Restorative Justice, and I see Karen here, the chair of the board here for TRJ as well, young leaders like Brother Amari, who you met a moment ago, and then credible messengers who are deeply rooted in this community, often cases have gone through some of the types of things that we are trying to intervene on. Sister Shantae Graham, who leads Full Circle Mentoring, Nikita Renee McDaniel, that OO2L and H stands for Our Opportunity to Love and Heal, and then Brother Terrell T.Y. Harris, who works with both TRJ and Forsyth Wins, which is the Cure Violence Initiative that is here in Winston-Salem, doing great work over by Cleveland Avenue Homes. So here's a very important thing for all of you to take away if you forget almost everything else that I said. My Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem is not a program, okay? It is not a program. And that is something I've had to help people to understand over time. What my Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem is focused on is facilitating collective impact. What does collective impact do? It brings people together in a structured way with intentionality to achieve social change. It's a network of community members, organizations, and institutions who advance equity by learning together, aligning, keyword, and integrating their actions to achieve population and systems level change, which you'll hear Mac and others with MBK National talk about often, is that population level impact, right? There's no one program. It's about 16,000 boys and young men of color, I believe, in Forsyth County. There's no one program that can take care of 16,000 boys, right? And we're just talking about boys and young men of color. But there are a myriad set of programs in our community, many of whom have similar, in some cases, identical missions, who, if working together in aligned and strategically targeted ways via collective impact tables, can coordinate the actions to create that continuum of care, so that, and the image, the metaphor I often use, having a about to be 16-year-old son and really understanding this in a literal figurative term, is that with all of our young people, no matter their backgrounds and the challenges that we're facing, but particularly with those who are facing the greatest challenges, we have to keep our hands on them. And I mean that literally. I keep my hands on my son every chance I get, right? We have to keep our hands on them. And the challenge is that if we are not strategically aligning and targeting the work that we are doing, then I may be putting my hands on you for a minute with my program, but then I take them off. And who's there to put the next set of hands on them? And who's there to put the next set of hands on them? Who's there to put the next set of hands on them? Because I can tell you from direct experience that if we take our hands off for more than a few seconds with some of the ones who are facing the greatest challenges, there is a pull, that old song, Slipping in the Darkness, right? That is constantly pulling them in that direction to slip them into darkness. And so we are fighting against that constantly. And when the hands are on, we're pulling them the other direction. That force is always there for Star Wars fans, the dark side of the force, right? Constantly pulling in that direction. And we have to constantly be pulling in the other direction. So we talk about the continuum of care, holistic supports, wraparound. That's what we're talking about. My Brother's Keeper, as a collective impact network, is about facilitating, coordinating, and organizing, literally organizing this work. Initiatives, and the initiatives that characterize collective impact implement 5 conditions with equity practices incorporated throughout. What are the 5 conditions for collective impact? 1 is a common agenda, which means coming together to collectively define the problem and create a shared vision to solve it. Everybody who is gathered around the table of my Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem is concerned about improving outcomes for boys and young men of color, and contributing their part that they bring to the table in order to do that. Shared measurement, that means tracking progress in the same way, allowing for continuous learning and accountability. Data is at the center, right? All of the decisions that we are making, are driven by the quantitative and qualitative data that we are intentional about gathering and intentional about kind of pulling together to let us know what is happening, what's the baseline, where do we need to go from here, what progress are we making, what pivots and course corrections, as they say in this work, do we need to make. Mutually reinforcing activities, that means integrating the participants in many different activities to make the end result. So everybody coming around that table has a part to play. There's a contribution they're already making. We're aligning all that stuff. Continuous communications. We are constantly talking over email, talking over text message, or if you don't like either of those, I'm giving you a call, old-fashioned phone call on the phone, and we're talking voice to voice, right? So we're constantly talking to each other because, of course, that is the way that we build and strengthen relationships. And strong relationships are literally what makes this thing move. Strong backbone, that means having a team dedicated to aligning and coordinating the work of the group. Action for Equity operates as the backbone for my Brother's Keeper Winston-Salem, kind of writ large, and particularly around milestone 6. As I'll share with you later on, we have another organization that is backbone and a couple of the other milestones that we've started to intentionally work on as well in recent years. What is the common agenda? Again, milestone 6, current community violence, stop the school to prison pipeline, providing second chances. And this is part of the definition that comes from the MBK Alliance. So for MBK Winston-Salem, we focus on the following: reducing violence in schools and community, collapsing the school to prison pipeline, STPP is for short, that begins at the elementary grade level by reducing exclusionary discipline and lost instructional time, shrinking the achievement gap, developing the capacity to participate in an inclusive economy. Some of you all recall that in September, I believe, of 2023, I think it was, the Office of Civil Rights, which some folks in DC are pretty much trying to collapse and shut down now, released a report based on 10 years of research and investigation that had been done here in Forsyth County. And it confirmed what we already knew, that exclusionary discipline was an issue at the middle school and high school level. But it also reinforced something that at least I had not been thinking about as much, which is that exclusionary discipline in Forsyth County was an issue at the elementary school level too. And that the trajectories of exclusionary discipline that lead to what we see when the kids are larger and older and getting involved in more things begins all the way down there. And that was one of the reasons why we began to focus on one of the pieces that became one of our major policy points. But I want to take a minute and talk about, Esheron is here. Where are you, dude? Did I see you come in there? She is, Esheron Monroe Johnson, who is the leader of Love Literacy. So we have taken on the past year or so additional milestones. Milestone number 1, which is entering school ready to learn, close the word gap, support enriching home environments, implement universal early health and developmental screenings, ensuring access to high quality early care, high quality workforce for early childhood teachers, eliminate suspensions and expulsions in early learning settings. Milestone 2, reading at grade level by the 3rd grade. And we're constantly talking about the literacy rate issues. Promote family, school, community partnerships to support joint book reading and home literacy, bring successful evidence-based practices to scale. So Love Literacy, which is located downtown in that same building where the Winston-Salem Street School is, they are kind of facilitating and taking on the campaign for grade level reading, okay? And as we kind of began to be aware of the different pieces that were part of the campaign for grade level reading, we said, well, if we're doing this through one of our partners, that is overlapping with it, we can take on large parts of milestone 1 and milestone 2. So the work with the campaign for grade level reading, which is being backboned by Love Literacy, gets us into this pre-K priority as well. So key, and again, I said, we're not a program. We are organizing and aligning collective impact. Key policy wins, okay? You all recall, and what was it, June of 2002, Superintendent, the Student Code of Conduct was adopted, right? And it set aspirational goals for social and emotional learning, more restorative practices, behavioral support for our students, as well as setting, of course, standards of student conduct, but also standards of how teachers and faculty and staff are engaging our young people so that they feel a strong sense of belonging. And so that was set up in 2022. One of the things that we began looking at, based in large part on a template from one of our statewide partners, Love Our Children, which operates out of New Hanover County, Wilmington is the county seat, was that they had recently had their school board, after an 18-month campaign, to pass a policy 4351, I believe it is, that eliminated suspensions, out-of-school suspensions for children in grades pre-K through 3, with exceptions for extreme circumstances involving weapons, drugs, threats, that sort of thing. And that was the template. I started having a conversation with Dr. Effie and our other partners, Effie McMillan, our other partners in the district and around MBK Winston-Salem table, and said, look, why can't we bring this here? Let's eliminate out-of-school suspensions for pre-K through 3. Because outside of those extreme circumstances, there's just no compelling argument to justify creating traumatic experiences for the youngest children, 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, when there are other ways to deal with little kids being little kids, right? In terms of the behavioral concerns. And so at the end of last school year, the Student Code of Conduct was revised and updated to include the prohibition of out-of-school suspensions for students in grades pre-K through 3. And it's already had, amen. We've already had a tremendous impact. Another really important piece, and Foresight Futures, Brother Adam Hill, we're a key partner around the MBK table in helping us to move this piece along, was that a new Section K was added to the student directory policy that is under the purview of the Winston-Salem County School Board to approve. And this Section K created an opportunity for school officials, based on an assessment of particular student needs, to share basic student contact information with organizations that provide mentoring, organizations that provide tutoring, organizations that provide support for substance abuse, those types of organizations, for students that they felt could benefit from those services, okay? And so that opened up the door, and that's really what it's about, opened up the door for us to begin looking at, all right, now we can start to figure out how to make the most of greater rates of referrals and greater intentionality, right, around community district partnerships, because people in the school district tell you all the time, you know, we can't do it by ourselves. I'm like, I know, and guess what? Us out here, we can't do it by ourselves either. But if we all get together, we can do this thing together, because we're always better together than we'll ever be apart. And so you have this new Section K in Policy 5125.5, that is accessible online, that lays out some of the details I was talking about. So I told you about the no pre-K through 3 suspensions. So just through December 10th, right, about 4 months into the school year, because of the faithful implementation of this policy, we have seen a 46% reduction in suspensions. And here's what's incredibly important to note too. There were no outliers here in terms of a vast reduction in one demographic category, but not in others, right? When you look back a year, you had 90 Black males in pre-K through 3 who had been suspended through the first semester. It was down to 39, right? You had 10 Hispanic, Black females had been suspended, down to 39. 10 Hispanic females, down to 7. Go down here to Black males, 303. Black males, little children, 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, 303 little Black children, okay, who have been suspended through the first semester. That was down to 137. Down to 137, okay? Hispanic males, 84, down to 33, okay? Those who identify as mixed race, many of whom are showing up as Black, okay? From 44 down to 12. So across the demographic board, we have seen that the faithful implementation of this has made a direct impact, okay? And so this is the power of policy change. When you have partners, such as the superintendent, her leadership in the district, who are serious about the other pieces that have to happen. Because one of the things that is not up here, just in terms of a slide with this, we were hypothesizing that as this new policy was being implemented, we might see a spike in in-school suspensions. As teachers and administrators were saying, well, we can't send them out of school anymore, but I don't know what to do with this particular behavior that's going on, so we're gonna send them down to hall of detention, right? But what we actually have seen, the number's not exact, but a vast reduction in school suspensions for this grade group as well. And that's because something different has happened in the classroom. I've seen documentation for the past 3 or 4 years of all professional development that the school district has done with teachers around SEL, around restorative practices, around behavioral supports, around check-ins at the door. Some of you all have heard that saying. I heard from an old youth pastor years ago, rules without relationship breeds rebellion. Right. And the older the kids get, if you don't have a relationship with them, they really don't want to hear each other nothing. Right. And so if you just insist, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that, I'm enforcing these rules, I'm about to cite you for this, it breeds rebellion. And that's when situations blow up that then go viral and we're all aghast, right? You have to build relations. Building relationships, especially with children, is not easy work because they see through the BS real quick and they call them wrong, okay? So, what is next? Brother Mac is here today doing this site visit because we have an opportunity. We are one of the finalists, about 8 finalists out of 24 communities that apply to be an accelerator community. And what will that do? It will provide, pun intended, an opportunity to accelerate by strengthening our shared measurement practices in order to better leverage our convening power to sustain the sense of urgency and accountability to align and implement our activities and maximize population level impact. If you were to go and Google MBK model communities, you will eventually find 4 communities that were recognized by the Obama Foundation as model communities, one in Omaha, one in Newark, which is a real model for us, one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one in Yonkers, New York, who as Mike would say, they found, right, because they've been doing this type of collective impact work. And in Newark and Omaha, over the course of a number of years, 20 years, have seen vast reductions held relatively consistent in homicide rates, okay? In Newark, 55%. In Omaha, 30-some-5%, right? And in Tulsa, Oklahoma, huge increases in the percentage of boys and young men of color enrolling in preschool, right? And in Yonkers, high rates of graduation for boys and young men of color. And so we are, prayerful, hopeful, and doing everything that we need to do to receive selection as an accelerated community. You'll start hearing about the Know Your Number campaign. And you go back to that, what I was sharing about the student directory policy and the door that it has opened. This is the key question. Are we reaching the students most impacted by exclusionary discipline with the continuum of care that will support their success and improve their outcomes? Are we keeping our hands on them consistently as we need to? I can show you another slide that is not in here that we talk about the 3,000. There's about 50 to 55,000 students, right, enrolled in the school district. There's about 3,000 of those students who are most impacted by exclusionary discipline, who receive anywhere from 2 to 5 or more documented disciplinary infractions in a given school year. Those 3,000 are disproportionately Black boys and girls, and disproportionately facing all the different challenges of poverty, high ACEs scores, more likely than not to have experienced foster care, all of this sort of thing, right? And so I'm constantly talking back and forth with Andy Kraft, who's in the data department there with the school district, and we meet some working groups to drill down more and more in terms of disaggregating that number. We are focused there to say, what are we doing for the 3,000? Those 3,000 are concentrated, about 2/3 of them, in 17 schools, okay, which are mostly Title I, predominantly Black and Brown free, reduced price lunch school, Carver High School, Parkland, Wiley, Middletown, Middle and High School, Glenn High School, these schools, right? That all have great opportunities there, but also great opportunities for growth. So the other thing, what's next? Advancing milestone 1 and 2, integration and alignment. These are some key questions we're thinking about. How does progress on milestones 1 and 2 connect to our efforts to collapse the school to prison pipeline and achieve milestone 6? You saw the reference to exclusionary discipline back there in the milestone 1 slide. As the no pre-K through 3 suspensions policy is implemented, is there a correlation between reducing exclusionary discipline for impacted students in these grades and literacy rates? We talk about data. We're going to have to do some deep disaggregated dives, right? Coordinating data, right? To see the students who were being most impacted in the earlier part of the early grades by out of school suspensions and some of these shifts, and whether or not we can see if this is having a discernible impact on literacy rates. It's important to understand MBK among the network landscape, Forsyth Family Power, Thriving Together, the School Justice Partnership, Project Safe Neighborhoods. We can do more together than we ever can apart. These are all collective impact minded and collective impact oriented and design networks that we are partnering with because we have to build an ecosystem. One of the first things I'm going to ask Brother Mac to speak to in a minute is just the importance of building ecosystem, because that's what enables us to keep our hands on our boys and young men of color. Last thing, positive trend to build on, because this is important. There was a historic drop in homicide rates in this city between 2023 and here's 2024, about 35% drop, okay? We can keep that trend going, right? And we are assessing, we're going to begin to assess what parts of the ecosystem most likely directly impacted this. This ecosystem never been directly impacted this historic drop, okay? Cure violence and the work they're doing is probably, one factor. There's other pieces as well, other things that are going on. So we're going to begin assessing that as part of, again, this deep dive on data. I don't know where Mary Pat got this picture from my face like that, but anyway. So anyhow, the point is that this is a starting point, that we can build on. And it's really important because ultimately it's the type of thing that MBK Alliance is looking at when you think about a Newark and an Omaha who also have milestones under their milestones. Is it safer for all children? And that, of course, dropping homicide rates is one big thing there. So that is it for the presentation. All right. So what we want to do right now, be mindful of the time to bring up our panel. Superintendent Tricia McManus, if you will come on up and not take the first seat, but the one right next to it. Okay, and she doesn't need much introduction. She's our superstar superintendent. Okay. And then Dr. Mona Lovett from Crosby Scholars, all right? And Brother MacArthur Antigua from MBK Alliance. So I do want to ask you all, as you kind of answer the first question I pitched to you, also just kind of briefly, kind of introduce yourselves and say more about the role you play and what you're doing with this work. I want to start with you, Mac, just in terms of sharing a bit with folks here from that bird's eye view of the national level and thinking about these 40 certified communities now that we have and the original 4 model communities that are now working on all 6 milestones. Why is the building of the ecosystem so important to achieving that population level impact?
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Mac. Thank you so much for welcoming me. My first time in Winston-Salem. Greetings from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I didn't bring any snow with me.
Thank you.
My role is I'm Deputy Director of Community Network Impact at the My Brother's Keeper Alliance. Just to summarize, My Brother's Keeper Alliance is part of the Barack Obama Foundation. The desired result of the alliance is to make sure that our Black and brown boys are better off. And across, we say 6 milestones. They're entering school ready to learn. They're reading in grade level of 3rd grade, graduating high school, completing college or vocational equivalent credit. I like to, they say get a job, but I like to say full engagement in a career, right? Because it's not just a job, but it's an art. And the last piece is being safe from violence, milestone 6. So for us, you wake up every morning, you can recite the 6 milestones. Like that's how we live and breathe. And so the president, as beautifully detailed by Reverend, has known that we need to be doing a better job collecting around this. And so over the course of 11 years that's been around, there's been a lot of amazing work that's been done. And again, I want to name, I got into this work 30 years ago as a gang violence preventionist in Chicago. So this work has been going on for a long time. I think what the president is able to do is put a light on it, use the platform, and continue to put a platform on. That being said, to your point, Reverend Ford, you named it before. If you can do it by yourself, you're not thinking big enough, right? And it's amazing. There's amazing work that's being done in a direct service experience, right? Or they do a great program, they have a good experience. That's massively important. However, right, they're going to leave that program experience and go somewhere else. And so we got to be thinking not just that one transaction, but what is the environment they're walking out into, right? Literally, be it what are the streets they're walking into, who are the adults and other peers they're walking to. And so at that point, you're thinking about a system, right? And so that's my team's approach, right? I have a sub team, about 4 folks, and what we named is over 11 years, lots of cities have been doing great work. And what we operate from a leadership perspective is we try to bring these elements of collective impact. Again, Reverend Ford, you passed the test. That's exactly how we try to pitch it, is saying, listen, if you want to make sure all the Black and brown boys in your community, well, all the boys are doing better off. But as we know, that's hitting Black and brown boys a certain way, right? How do we make sure you're setting yourselves up? Like I say, have good bones of a house together so that, I like to say, from grassroots to grass tops, people can come to the potluck and they know what they need to bring to the potluck to make something else. Because there's no shortage of people that say, man, I want to make sure kids are better off. Everybody wants to do that. What we're trying to make sure is stop and spray and pray. Stopping a lot of busy, right? And I often say, the toughest part of this work is inviting all of us. I like to say, nothing changes outside these 4 walls until I change these inside 4 walls, right? And what that means is, well, if you want a different result, because everything that's being done right now is the beautiful production of the system as it is. We all part of this. We want it different, but we in it, right? That means I got to change some behavior. I got to help my team change some of their behavior. And if we all can align our changes, then something's going to take in a different direction. And I often say that is the hardest part of this work because we're all incentivized to keep things security. Losing the sense of this is how we always, it's scary to do something new. And it's really powerful to actually invite the people in the room, like our ambassador, who are living it, to go, what do you think? What else could we be doing? What else we know? So why I'm here is a name that we have for, and I'll turn it over real quick because I don't like the Reverend, I like microphones, so I gotta be careful. One is there's a lot of cities that are doing amazing work. We found 4 of them when my team came in, and we call them a model community because they worked on one of the milestones. And at an objective level, the stats showed that they did it at a population level. You named Tulsa, for example, increased students of color participation in pre-K by 30%. Because, well, things like they made sure it was available at every public school in the Tulsa Independent School District. They partnered with the faith community to do registration at church so that the families, they trust their pastor. Okay, I trust you. I'm going to trust that, right? So they had to leverage faith community people, right? They had to change how they train teachers up. So a lot of different things led to that shift, right? Where we're talking thousands of people, thousands of kids got a better start. And as he named, reduction of homicides is not just the job of the police. It's not just the job of the mayors. It's the job of the residents in the neighborhood to do that. And one powerful thing, I'll just name one quick story. It's really powerful in Omaha. They just had their safest year. They had 100% clearance on all their cases, which doesn't usually happen, right? And one of the things that happened over time is they had a room like this, and they said the room started with 7 people. But they would look at a map and go, where's all the violence happening in Omaha? And then the police showed up and they were at their end of the room. And the residents showed up at their end of the room. And at some point, they were kind of meeting to meet, but it wasn't getting real. And they actually drew up a list for each other. This is what I need from you. And then the police were, wow, this is what I need from you. And it wasn't until folks started ticking off the list, like, well, those cops aren't doing their job. And so, all right, I got to remove them or do something else. And so they're like, hey, but you got to help us figure out this block. Okay. That didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. That meeting now is 300 strong. They use geomapping to find, and they use a public health approach, knowing that how do we stop the spread of violence? Because when one thing happens, that thing could, and they deploy credible messengers into space. So they're borrowing a lot of things, and that's part of, when they're part of MBK, we introduce them to leaders from that area. We say best practices, but I have to say better practices, because I go say check local listings. It's not like you just grab something and put it in, because every terrain is different, every community is different. So it's up to you all to figure out, take the best, leave the rest. But I'd say ultimately our value, hopefully we'll do some investment being part of the accelerator. And so just to be naming, we want to build the next wave of model communities. And what I'm here to witness is Winston-Salem's MBK Winston-Salem put some really good stuff. They make a really nice PowerPoint deck. What I'm busy is trying to, eat the coin. Is this real penny? Is this a real quarter? Right? That's what I'm doing, kicking the tires a bit to see how it is, because we'd like to invest in communities being the next wave of model communities. We want to help you solve milestone 6, which is not to say all our communities want to do this. What we're looking at is who wants to do this within 2 to 3 years. That's a lot. That's a big lift. Mayor Pro Tem has spent the last 45 minutes with, what do we got to do, Mac, to show you? I was like, okay, that's how you roll. All right. I was like, okay. Okay. But that's kind of what we want to see, right? The kind of, and obviously not just in words, but in actions that she has done in her role, as well as the other folks on this panel. So just want to name, I want to share gratitude. I have to say, we had 250 cities answer the call for the President 120, right? Now here's the thing, but Mac, you're only working with, 40 are certified? That's not 250, because not everybody wants to take what we're saying. That's okay. We're not saying you can't be part of this work, but my team focuses on folks who want to play this game. It's a different game. It's a tougher game. I want to say so far, just from my experience, it's really powerful to witness how you play this game. It's evidence, real. And so I want to just share appreciation, because not every community joins in this way, and already reporting green shoots, successes, etc. At the end of the day, what the president wants, what my boss wants, so that we can tell more great stories about, hey, this is how Winston-Salem cut. Make sure it's not just, obviously we want 40 less deaths. We know that each one of those are connected to families. We know those are connected to other families and blocks. That's what we're talking about, right? That's what that means. So thanks for letting me.
To this question, how has the work of MBK Winston-Salem contributed to the district's efforts to implement these trauma-informed, restorative, social emotional learning focused aspirations of the Code of Conduct over these past couple of years?
It's been amazing, the contribution. And I will say, as I sit here and was looking at the numbers, thank you for highlighting the improvement. I'm always like, okay, but there's still 137 up there that we got to address. How'd that happen? How'd that happen with our policy? But that's me just in that mindset of continuous improvement. But you have been, I would say, two main roles: a thought partner and an accountability partner. I think what helps with the school system is when you have people not day-to-day living in the school system, calling out things and showing, okay, let's look at the data together, and honestly, us giving the data, because I think there's this a wall up sometimes, and people don't want to be transparent. So we're like, here's the data. And then someone saying, okay, this data is not where it needs to be. And what can we do? Not only we're going to hold you accountable, but how can we help you think through other solutions? And so I would say, having a space that's regularly scheduled, having us regular look at the data, not shy away from it, look at it. What can we do different? And then what can we do to help? That whole mindset. So I would say accountability partner and a thought partner has been very powerful for us.
And just to piggyback on that as a segue for what I want to add a moment to talk about. So I did include, I have a number of different slide decks that I use for MBK. One of them really gets into the nuts and bolts. So the MBK steering committee meets regularly, during the school year. I mean, sometimes we'll do the summer as well, every 2 months, okay? Every 2 months on the second Wednesday at 4 o'clock, and we're often over there at Love Literacy in person or hybrid. And what I have seen, to your point, is that those steering committee meetings often become kind of workshop sessions where, as we bring reports or some new data that I might have got from Andy or whatnot out of the working groups, we're all sitting around there together workshopping, right? Workshopping, what do we do with this? What are the solutions? How do we move this thing forward? And it was out of one of those workshopping sessions that emerged this piece, like what I want you to speak to, relative to how critical it was going to be to strengthen partnerships between the community kind of writ large in terms of all the different organizations, some of which are here today, and the school district, because both parties know we can't do it by ourselves. There are trust issues that we have to walk across the bridge to each other on, that there's a history that's real, but then there's also these opportunities that are being created because of this transformational leadership. And so, Dr. Brown, if you could just kind of speak to kind of what your experience has been, and we've had this special project working group that you have led, looking at how to strengthen community district partnerships, and particularly thinking about what we are getting ready to pilot now in terms of building a collective database. We want to invite as many organizations to do as possible so that we can really get a view on how every kid is being touched or not being touched in a good way, of course, and what we need to do to keep our hands on them more.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Mona Lovett with Crosby Scholars. And so when we were invited to be a part of this work, one of the things that people say is, well, Mona, Crosby Scholars has been around forever. And you all know how to do all of this. And we don't. This being a part of the network and the system work is so important to all of us, because none of us can do this alone. And so we, as a part of this partnership, we can gather together, we can talk, with the superintendent, with the other partners, and find out what the needs are. We have different needs because we're doing some things differently, right? So we're a program of close to 10,000 students, and we have a focus within the Crosby Scholars Program on the AMPS program, African American Males Pursuing Educational Dreams. So we have this big program, but then we have this targeted program really focusing on
that was canceled.
But there are lots of programs working with Black males, right? And so when we can understand what we are all doing, we can come around the table. And I think to speak to what we're working on now is who's touching which students and who's not being touched at all. So are some students getting 20 touches in every program? And are there some students that are not a part of anything? We have to pull those in, and there are enough of us as we get together collectively to make that happen. But we have to know the data. We have to know who's being touched, how they're being touched, when they're being touched, and who's best to connect with them. It may not be best. Of course, I always think so. I always want them all to be in Crosby, right? I was at a program last night. They said, "Oh, Mona, Crosby doesn't count. Everybody's in Crosby." No, they're not. And we found that out when we looked at the data. And that's why there's an AMPed program. Black males were not joining Crosby Scholars at the rate of all of our other students. And so it led us to understand that we needed to do something intentional, focused, targeted. And we couldn't do that alone. So we needed to partner with other groups in neighborhoods, in churches, in other groups, fraternities, to say, we need your help because somehow our message is not connecting. And when you can't connect, when you don't have that relationship, well, why are they gonna come just because somebody says Miss Mona is nice? They don't know Miss Mona from anybody else, right? So we have to build those. And so that next step that we're taking in bringing all of these groups together, all of our partners, all those who want to do this work together is, yes, we have programs, but collective impact, which is hard work.
Yeah.
It's very hard work and it doesn't happen overnight. It's bringing us together to trust each other, to build relationships, and to fill the gaps and to touch those who aren't being touched. And that's how we'll be able to move the needle. And the collective also will work on the systems change that as programs, it's difficult for us to do our day-to-day work and try to change systems. Because we're trying to catch those who are already in the pipeline and help and support and redirect as we can. And so we need this network to work on that level so that we can continue to support, but work on our level with the day-to-day, because we can't lose anybody. So we can't just work over here and not work day-to-day with the people who are already in. And we can't just do this and not change the system.
Right. Work is leading us through the building of the civic infrastructure. You know, the Bible talks about there's nothing new under the sun. So the ideas that we're talking about how we need to intervene with these young people are not new ideas. And there have been documented periods, even in the last 30 years in this city, where people have kind of come together. But the question is always around sustaining it. And it's because it's not sustained, we end up slipping back, falling back, because key people transition or move on to other communities, even die or elections happen, that sort of thing. And you have to build a civic infrastructure that sustains it as a matter of the culture, no matter whether or not it's Mayor Pro Tem Dee Dee Adams or Mayor Pro Tem somebody else, Mayor Allen Jones or somebody else, Superintendent McManus or somebody else, right? That you are continuing this work. If A for E and all of us in A for E just disappear tomorrow, right? This work continues because that's what's going to be the new thing that's going to make the difference in making sure that this doesn't just go up and down year to year, but stays going like that, right? Because we're doing something differently in terms of the ways that we're working to get over sustaining it over time. So I do want to take a moment to open up to questions. I could say a lot more, everybody here could say a lot more. We've got a few minutes. I do want to see if there's any questions anybody has for the panel and comments you want to share. Mitch is going, and then we got one here. Go ahead, Mitch.
I will share what I couldn't share with Superintendent Mo Green when he was here last week. And it's his prompt number 4. What is your 1 and 4? What are your organizations doing well? And what are your organizations plan to do to help? And so I want to give kudos to Crosby. I also want to give kudos to Superintendent McManus because evolution. The only constant in life is change. When I was in Crosby, we had a Saturday Academy on a Saturday from 9 until 12. My son was in Crosby. Saturday Academy became available to everybody, whether it was on Saturday or not. The AMP program had people with lived experiences, who a retired educator who's now on the school board, Richard Watts, who gave us his credit card statement to talk about financial literacy. So now that I have a junior in high school who feel now that Klarna is doing DoorDash and we have to talk about budgeting, I often refer back. Remember that credit card statement? You're building your credit. That's evolution. We didn't have that when I was in private. Right. For the superintendent to open doors, for MBK to come in, for Crosby to make school visits, That is collective impact, because we are not touching everybody, and we're limiting our possibility by expecting them to come to us, because we're the shining present that they're supposed to come to us. We have to go to them. That's what our community is used to. Knocking on doors saying, where are you? I didn't see you today. Are you okay? Let me lay eyes on you. That's what I'm used to hearing. And so I commend this city, the city that I'm a native of, as you can tell, also a graduate, for evolving and being open to change. Because otherwise, we're gonna lose this generation. Because they don't care that you're nice. What do you have to offer them? And it has to be something that's sustainable, that's gonna last past when I'm out of school, what's next? So here's our what's next. If I need to sell harder than Mayor Pro Tem.
She is leading the We Deal Together initiative, which is tremendous work, okay?
Very much.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
So first, a comment about the Black males not being in Crosby Scholars. The New York Times this week had an article about Black male enrollment in colleges plummeting, it said, and that even the HBCUs, which was so surprising. So I'm with Winston-Salem Freedom Schools, and I work at the elementary level, but and you all come in and read to us, but I'm thinking now we've got to start planting those seeds. You know, everybody's young. The other question is from Mr. McCook, that was at Omaha, that had the preschool. Tulsa, okay, and that was universal preschool.
Yeah.
Was it already in place, or did you all do something to make
Well,
that happen?
Well,
They initiated that, right?
The
They,
school system? Or-
well, MBK partnered,
Okay.
yeah, our MBK, sort of the analog to what Action for Equity is, their version of that. There was Impact Pulse, which is their backbone that holds a cradle to career effect, approach. And they set up, they worked at the school district to make sure that pre-K was available.
And you were the funding thing?
Well, they worked with the education department to make that happen. Yes, and yes, thank you. Augmented by the local foundation. And there's, I just want to cite one example. New York State actually has written into their state statute a $25 million line item for funding My Brother's Keeper. It's called the My Brother's Keeper Law. Yeah, and so it's really interesting just to give you a sense of, but here's the interesting effects of that. We were able to connect with their state education department because they have to certify because they give money directly to them. And so when we showed up and we had this process, they said, hey, can we align our processes? But we had to go, well, here's the thing. We are not talking about programming. And the state education board was like, I know, we want them to think beyond programming. And so they're actually leveraging us to help. And what was really powerful, so we have, I think, out of our 40, I think 9 of them are certified in New York State. And that's partly they had a head start, right? They've been doing programming so long, but there are some superintendents there, right? With similar leadership approaches and superintendent here going, you know what? We're a unique delivery mechanism for kids in our system. And what they also acknowledged is we only work from this set hours. We need to, school success depends on success. So for example, MBK, Uniondale, New York, it's a very small community, but a large Latino population, actually. So it's the Hudson River Valley up in New York. They're pursuing this notion called multiple literacies, where they're looking at grade level reading in 3rd grade. And they're partnering with nonprofits and local businesses to support continued reading throughout the community to help reduce learning loss over the summer. So again, that's an example of, in some ways, we got a running start because they had lots of programming going on, and that state education part is like, can we use you to almost get our folks to nudge? And again, not all in New York State, they don't have to sign on to this, to us, but now that they meet folks like here, they're inspired. So I just wanted to sort of illustrate that's the hope of our national network. Again, I think our strengths are to amplify, to platform, and to show that it can be done. One more thing I'll just want to name, one of the things we're dealing with literally in the past 3 months comes to data. I don't know if this resonates for you all, But we're noticing that the Department of Education, clearinghouses of data are like being gone.
Yes, they are.
And so that's, it's hard to improve stuff that you don't know what's going on. And so it's really important locally, what just means is now locals gotta really work together because they can't depend on a national backup to support. So just wanna cite, it's really powerful so far, the centering of data. You're gonna need this moving forward.
The centering of data and also this being community-based and led, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen in these other places. And so we are the ones who are gonna be able to keep this thing going through these strong partnerships. So Sylvia, I know it's 1 o'clock. I don't want to belabor the time. Do we have time for any more conversation? You want to close it up? Okay, I do see one more question. We do that, but we'll do one last question.
And something you wanted to say as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, not so much. I said a lot. Let me get this brother right here and then we'll bring us in questions.
Quick, man. You guys, question time, 7 Park United Way. I work a lot with the faith communities and I've heard conversations before, in your remarks about faith communities. Can you speak, Mr. Mack, and also, Superintendent Manis, Dr. Lovett, to some of the best practices that you've seen with the faith community and how that could be implemented here locally?
So they're gonna have the last word. We'll start here, actually, the superintendent, then go down here and Matt will close us out and then we'll be done. All right?
So thank you. I think that as far as the school system, we have many churches, many faith-based leaders that are partnering specifically with direct schools. I think the most important thing that we do is, again, thinking about collective impact and getting all those people and what services they want to provide, those leaders, actually integrated into our framework. And I think that's the work that's to come with Thrive Together and with, we just had a meeting this morning about they're all providing different layers of support at different, some might be focused on food pantries, and some might be focused on providing tutorials on Sundays or weekend. So how do we make sure that every faith-based organization actually knows where they can support along that continuum from a systems level? Because right now we have a ton of churches and they are working directly with individual schools. Hopefully that makes, I hope that makes sense. I think that's our future. That's our next step. I will say one more thing, and I love Misha's comment. I've told my people, if you build it, you can't have the mindset, if you build it, they will come. You have, and I also, there is no parent that exists that doesn't want something good, better for their child. Not one. They just may not know how to access that. So we have to stop saying the parent wouldn't sign the form, the parent wouldn't respond. Go to the house, meet with the parent, every one of them will respond. They will. Let's build all this stuff and just hope they come. That's why we're missing some. That's why we're missing some. Thank you.
Great, I'll be very brief. We reach out to the faith community. We're connected to the faith community. We have ministers on our team. We bring volunteers in from the faith community. We ask the faith community for some money, all right? But we encourage them to encourage their people. They have the relationships to be a part of what we're doing. And then our students also support the community because they volunteer. That's a requirement of our program. So not only do they come from there, but they learn volunteering and go back out and share that with the community. And as my husband told me one time, he was at a Panera Bread and he heard some people say, you just need to get you some of those Crosby Scholars and you'll be able to do what you need to do. That connects. That's a connection, though. That's a connection to the community, and that's a connection to the faith community, because a lot of times they are leading some of these activities and our students are a part of that. It's really important.
Yeah, I think just to affirm what we know, the gift of the faith community is safe spaces and strong relationships, especially for those of a cultural affinity. And we know in this current time, for some folks, some spaces aren't as safe. And so definitely we're talking about Latina boys, Black boys. I think we're gonna need our